Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this technical assistance session. Today, my name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be the moderator and technical support for today's webinar. Today's topic is business engagement, and we are joined by our presenter, Morgan Diamond, today. Just a couple of things before we get started. As a reminder, all participants on the call are in listen-only mode and cannot unmute yourselves. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post those in the chat or the Q&A, and we will address them throughout the presentation as well as at the end of the webinar during a Q&A session. Another reminder that this webinar is being recorded and the slides from today can be found on the Illinois WorkNet NOFA website. I will put that in the chat momentarily. And then the recording will also be housed on that same website. The recording will not be available though for about 48 hours after this live session. So just make note of that. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering closed captioning on this live version. It's not as accurate as we would love it to be, but it does do a pretty good job of picking up our voices. But if you do need accurate closed captioning, that will be available on the recording on the YouTube. We are able to edit that and make it as accurate as possible. A reminder that if you do have faulty internet connection or audio connection today and you would prefer to call in, you can do so using the phone number in your original registration email that you received. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our presenter today, Morgan Diamond.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you everyone for having me today and for DCO for inviting me here. As Kirsten mentioned, I am the presenter for today and I work at Young Invincibles. Just as a little bit of background on Young Invincibles, we are a national nonprofit with a office located in Chicago, and our mission is to amplify the voices of young adults in the political process and expand economic opportunity for our generation. So what brings us here today is that as part of our mission, Young Invincibles has done a significant amount of research and advocacy around apprenticeships and helping make sure that they are accessible to young adults. As part of our work around apprenticeships, we have done some consultation with past Youth Career Pathways grantees, and we're really excited to bring what we've learned from those past grantees as well as through our research to you here today. So we're going to talk about business engagement. And so next slide, please. So why does business engagement matter? So most practically, business engagement is a critical part of the Youth Career Pathways application. And I've pulled some of the quotes from the notice of funding that brought you here today, just to highlight how critical it is when you're thinking about putting together your program and your application. So one of the first components is that the application reviewers are really going to be looking for the business involvement as it pertains to how you've developed your programming. We really want to make sure that the applications demonstrate that you have been really thoughtful about how to put together a program that's very responsive to the needs of the business and to help make sure that your young adults are really prepared to walk in on day one, ready to thrive in a particular business's environment. The second component, and I won't read through all of the quote, is really just that we want to make sure that you have support and show support from the businesses. This is going to be kind of a large commitment from both the employers and from your agency's perspective, and we want to make sure that they are on board and really ready and excited to welcome young adults into their environment. But even more philosophically and beyond the notice of funding, the overarching goal of this grant program is to make sure that we're expanding the quality and the number of quality career development opportunities available for young adults with barriers. And we can't meet that goal without business involvement. So it is really critical that we know how to approach them and get them excited to partner. Next slide. So how do we engage businesses? Pretty straightforward. So for today, we're going to just to give you a run through of our agenda. We're just going to talk about some common obstacles with employer engagement and just kind of highlight some of the concerns that you might have as a community-based organization who's working with employers. And next slide, please, Kirsten. So some of the steps as part of the conversation, the bulk of the conversation for today, we're going to talk about steps for employer engagement, That will be, again, the main part of our conversation. And even within that part of the discussion, we'll talk about how can you sell or pitch your program to employers. And as one of the main parts of selling yourself is to make sure that you're speaking the language of business. I know a lot of us, myself included, can be a little bit guilty of using community-based organization, CBO, nonprofit jargon, and that doesn't necessarily translate or get businesses excited. So we want to make sure that we're translating our value add into what businesses need and want. And then again, we'll end with some Q&A, but if you have any questions or comments that come up before then, please feel free to put them in the chat feature and we'll try to address them as soon as possible. Also, I know there's probably a wealth of knowledge on this call and people who've already been engaged in working with outreach to businesses. So if you have any tips or anecdotes that you'd like to share, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. Next slide. So, what are some of the challenges with engaging employers? Let's just dive right in. Again, some of us have a lot of experience doing some outreach, and others of us might not. But some of the frequent concerns that we have is which companies should we target, especially if you're located in a major urban environment like Chicago. There are way too many businesses out there for us to just kind of randomly cold call. So, we need to figure out what it is that we need to do to hone our list and make sure that we're being as effective and efficient as possible in our outreach. Another concern that comes up is just who should we speak with, or if you want to be grammatically correct, with whom should you speak? But either way you say it, it's kind of a challenge that some people have faced about who to actually communicate with when you are doing outreach. Who in the company would be the best person to target and try to get them excited about partnering with your organization? Another question that comes up a lot of times when we're talking about engaging with employers is when should I approach them? At what stage of developing our program should we talk to them? And if we already have kind of an established program, how should we get new partners excited? Another common concern is how do I help them overcome their fears of working with youth? Some of these fears are very legitimate and might even revolve around some legality concerns or liability, and others might just be based on myth. But either way, how can we help businesses overcome those fears of working with young adults? Hopefully, by the end of today's session, we can address all of these common challenges and concerns, and we'll just do that by going to the next slide and talking about kind of the steps for engaging with employer partners. So some of the steps, the trainer in me really wanted to have 5, but alas, there are 6 steps. But they're all really important. The first one is around developing a targeted list of employers. So as I mentioned, it's both time effective for you, efficient for you, as well as for the employers that you're partnering with to make sure that you've already identified people who are very likely to partner with you even before you pick up the phone or the Zoom to do some outreach. The second step is to reach out to the businesses. This seems obvious, but there are some kind of tips and tricks to making sure that you can get your foot in the door when you do communicate with any prospective company partners. The third step is to identify the businesses that that you're reaching out to, identify all of their needs. So you do this by having an interview. So once you get your foot in the door by doing some great marketing and calling, you really want to make sure that you use your listening ears, as they say, to identify what the businesses need and what their pain points are that hopefully your program can address. Then, after you listen to their needs, you're going to pitch your services and really sell yourself using kind of strength based language. I think a lot of times community based organizations might approach employer engagement in a way that they feel like they are begging companies to take on their young adults. And really, because you all do such great work preparing young adults for employment opportunities, you're not begging, you're really helping say, I have a pot or a pool of ready, talented people who are ready to help you fill your business needs. And so we want to make sure we're using that strengths-based language. The fifth step is to confirm the agreement. So after you've done a great job of pitching your services, you want to make sure that everybody is aware of the responsibilities for all of the parties involved. And then last but not least, you want to maintain the relationship by providing great customer service. And we are going to dive into each of these steps in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please, Kirsten. So step 1 is create a list of businesses. Next slide. So before you can do any kind of outreach to businesses, you have to know your targets. It's Valentine's Day is coming up, and just like in the dating world, you have to know yourself before you reach out to anybody else. And so that's the same thing here for reaching out to businesses. You need to know your program model. So if you've already looked into the notice of funding, you'll see that there are a variety of program models that you can potentially pursue or propose in your application, and all of them require varying degrees of business involvement. The Career Pathways Directory, which is a great resource that if you're not familiar with it, has a really great visual of the level of business involvement that's needed depending on the kind of career development experience that you're proposing. So, for example, a short term career opportunity or an internship is going to require a different level of ask from an employer than something more intensive like a youth apprenticeship program. And so, you really need to hone in on what exactly your model is going to look like and what it will entail, as many details as you can provide, so that you know in advance of reaching out to businesses what your request will be. Also, you want to be comfortable knowing all of the target populations or the one target population that you'll be working with, so that you can really make sure that you identify the barriers that you're going to help them address before they even step foot in the door at an employer. So if you're working with youth with disabilities, the employers that you reach out to might look a little bit different than the employers you would reach out to for young parents, for example, because you'd want to make sure that, for example, with youth with disabilities, you're working with youth or reaching out to companies that wouldn't have any kind of obstacles to youth that might have physical disabilities. Next slide. So after you kind of identify your program and you feel comfortable knowing what it is that you all are going to be proposing, you want to create a list of 5 to 10 companies to target by researching a few things. The first thing that you want to look at is the growing sectors and businesses in your region. So you want to make sure that you are identifying companies that might have a number of vacancies either immediately or in the long term, because ideally we're kind of cultivating a pipeline of businesses who want to start engaging with youth on a more long-term basis to help them fill their coming talent needs. You can also kind of refine your list by identifying graying industries. So, industries where they are currently experiencing or will soon experience a large retirement boom as baby boomers start to and continue to age out of the workforce, might be great opportunities to help you partner with those companies that are facing this kind of silver tsunami, as it's called. And then lastly, youth-friendly opportunities. Which companies in your community offer employment opportunities that might excite youth? Because on the opposite end of business engagement, there's also youth engagement and recruitment, and you want to make sure that the opportunities you're providing you can get youth excited about them as well. And we'll dive into this a little bit more. So, Kirsten, next slide, please. So the first kind of way that you can refine your list that I just mentioned was identifying growing sectors. And there are a few ways that you can go about doing this. Both formal data sources and informal sources will help you kind of create a really strong list of employer partners that are likely to be kind of successful opportunities for your young people. So the formal data sources include places like the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They give great information for 10-year projections. So especially if you are going to be doing a more intensive career opportunity like a youth apprenticeship, these would be industries that have strong 10-year projections and a lot of growth would be great opportunities as potential partners. Illinois Department of Employment and Security, IDES, has a number of kind of data wonks on their staff who are very helpful and can provide really refined information specific to your local community about which employers and which industries might be really good sectors to target for your program. Local chambers of commerce are also really strong sources of data and information and can provide that kind of on the ground, anecdotal, if not more formal evidence of specific employers that would need young people to fill some of their pain points or some of their talent needs. And then your local workforce areas as well are great sources of information for you to kind of gather either specific companies, specific occupations, or more broadly, the industries that could be targets for your program. Then there are also informal sources like websites like LinkedIn, Indeed, Monster, Glassdoor. All of those websites you can kind of peruse and find opportunities that are available, entry level jobs that could be good fits for your young adults. These are great resources to use. And then, of course, your personal and professional networks. Cold calling can be a little bit intimidating. And so you want to make sure that you are leveraging your professional and personal networks so that you can have an easier entree into getting an interview with an employer. You can also check around company websites if you know of companies in your community that you kind of heard of, but you're not sure what specific occupations might be available. It's always helpful to just go to the source and look at their website to see what is out there. And then you can also just look up press releases. A lot of time, large employers will announce either mass hiring or kind of some community-based initiatives that might be a key or kind of a hint to you that this employer is really involved in the community and wanting to support efforts like your program, your youth employment program. Next slide, please. Another way, as I mentioned, about kind of refining your list is to identify those growing industries. Some of the ones that we found through our research and just kind of the knowledge that we've gathered from other career pathway grantees is manufacturing, government, and agriculture are all facing huge retirement booms as the baby boomers do continue to age out of the workforce. Manufacturing, in particular, is one that's frequently cited as very vulnerable to the aging economy, or excuse me, the aging labor pool and workforce. Government might not be the best fit for your youth career pathway programs, but it's something to keep in mind about public sector opportunities. And then agriculture for some of us who are located in more rural communities, those are also facing an aging labor pool. Next slide, please. So, in addition to kind of refining your list based on what are promising sectors in terms of growing, in terms of their growth or soon to be vacancies because of retirement, you also want to refine your list by looking for youth friendly companies. And the way to do that is through a few of these bullets that I have on the screen here. So, one way to see if a company is going to be a good fit for your young adults is accessibility. So, in here in Chicago, we have a robust public transportation system, and so if you are thinking of launching a program here in Chicago, you want to make sure that the employers are located as best as possible near public transportation. Many of the young people cite transportation as a barrier, a significant barrier to being successful in programs. And so you want to mitigate as many barriers as possible by making sure that your company partners are as close to public transportation and ideally located close to the majority of your young people that you serve. Another way to see if a company would be youth friendly or a good fit for you all is through entry level jobs. So you want to make sure you're partnering with companies that have opportunities that are right fit for the skill level of the young people that you work with. One thing to be aware of though is that sometimes people are deterred from thinking that there are opportunities available for young people because all entry level jobs at a company, of a particular company, might require a bachelor's degree, for example. A lot of companies are guilty of having education inflation where they require associates and bachelor's degrees for jobs that might not require them. So some of this in your outreach to businesses might involve a little bit of pushback in education around, what is actually needed to fill the job duties that you see listed in a particular job description and how your young adults that you prepare are ready to meet those needs and fill those job duty requirements. Another way to look at organizations to see, make sure that they're the right fit is mentorship. Are there anything, or is there anything on the website of the company that highlights any kind of investment in the employees, whether through mentorship programs or internship programs? This also is an indication that they would probably be a willing partner with your organization. Another kind of hint is if they're civic minded. Again, you can find this out through press releases. If they announce they have kind of a community volunteer program for their employees, they have specifically named corporate social responsibility programs and plans. This also is a hint that they would be more open minded about working with youth who have some employment barriers. Safety is another concern, of course. You want to make sure it's an appropriate fit for your young people. If you have a youth oriented industry that's located near you, that's also a great idea to keep in mind so that, again, you can not only attract companies that are a good fit for your organization, but also the young people who will be filling the roles that your employer partners need. then lastly, locally owned is another good thing to look for because one, you might avoid some of the bureaucracy of going to headquarters for organizations that are either, multinational corporations or just aren't located here in Illinois. So ideally, you want to look out for companies that are locally owned, not only because it's easier to get your foot in the door, but also because they probably have a little bit closer connection to the community that the young people will come from. Next slide. So this slide is actually taken from the Department of Labor's apprenticeship toolkit it's a great resource for learning about some more details around business engagement, specifically for apprenticeship, but much of the content in that toolkit would be relevant regardless of what program model you choose. So some indicators of good targets or good target companies are that they have a lot of job postings or that they stay open for a long time. So if you're doing some, browsing on Indeed or Glassdoor or any of those kind of websites, and you've noticed that they're having trouble filling positions and they haven't been filled for a while, this could be a good opportunity for you to do some outreach, and they might be a company you want to add to your target list. Another one is around, the promoting from within. This might be more specific to apprenticeship, but it's also a good indicator that if instead of hiring kind of mid-level management jobs from internally, they have to do some outreach and post externally. That could be an opportunity to say, well, as you kind of backfill your middle management jobs, we can help provide some more entry-level talent. Retiring workforce is another, as we mentioned, indicator of a good target. And then jobs constantly being posted and reposted. And then if they're just kind of, there aren't any job openings or vacancies available, but you recognize that the company has to kind of upskill their employees, that's really more for apprenticeship. But again, as they upskill their workforce, they'll still have some needs for entry level workers that your young adults could potentially fill. Next slide. So that was a lot to say that you essentially just want to make a really good list. And there are a variety of ways to make that list. But the next step, once you do feel like you have 5 to 10 good companies that would be really good fit for your organization, you want to contact those businesses. Next slide. So how do you contact targeted businesses? You first want to identify who in the company has the knowledge of hiring and operations. So who within the organization would you be able to speak with? Who maybe somebody in HR? If it's a relatively small company, it might be somebody in the C-suite. So like a CEO, CFO, COO, whatever CO acronym you want to use. But they would probably have a good knowledge of both what their hiring needs are and the nature of specific job titles and job duties that potentially young people could fill. You might have to interview more than one person. This might have to be kind of like a snowball sampling of people within an organization to really get insight into their company operations and if you would be able to help prepare young people to fill their vacancies. But then after you do acknowledge, kind of find the right person, whether the right title and or name, ideally, you want to do a request for an interview. So to request an interview, whether you speak with a receptionist or whoever it is that you initially speak with at an organization, you want to be as strengths based as possible. So instead of saying, we have a youth employment program and we really want to make sure that these young adults have a great career opportunity, many of them have barriers, and you kind of going on about kind of the problems, you want to make sure you're saying, we'd like to speak with you about how we can support your recruitment and retention goals. You can mention, that you have a youth program, but you always want to make sure that you're being as strengths based as possible. Next slide. So one concern that people have often when they're doing outreach to companies is, do I have to be a salesperson? And for many of us, especially those of us who gravitate towards nonprofit work and community-based organizations, sales is not necessarily something that we feel kind of aligned with. But the good thing is, for any salesperson, you're really more of a consultant than just a purely salesperson. You're trying to figure out what it is that the company needs, identify those needs, and then speak to how your organization and the young people that you prepare are going to help that business fill their needs. So you don't have to feel like a salesperson if that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Next slide. So after you kind of reach out to the employer, you find the right person that you want to speak with at the company. The next step is kind of the interview. And this is where you kind of put on your sales consultant hat and figure out what are their pain points, what are their challenges, what are their hopes, wishes, and dreams, and how can you as an organization fill that by giving them a pipeline of talented and qualified young adults. Next slide. So the interview is really a two-way street, and it's important to keep that in mind. One, so that again, you come at the interview from a strengths-based perspective and not just from a please hire my young adults kind of lens. It's really, is this the right fit for the young people that I serve? And will we be a good fit for you? So on the employer side, you really want to understand all of the employer's needs. So some of the questions that you can ask during the interview, and this could take about 30 minutes, 15 minutes, it's really kind of, up to you how you'd want to structure this. But some of the questions that you can ask are, what entry level jobs do you have the most difficulty filling? So these are kind of those persistent vacancies that we talked about that might be great opportunities for the young people. How easily, as another question, how easily are you able to find workers with the right skill sets? This hopefully could be an opportunity for employers to attract an entry level talent pipeline, but then help cultivate their skills and help them move up in the company long term. And so you want to figure out if there are potential opportunities for advancement as well. What positions have the highest turnover? You want to listen again if there's a lot of turnover, if they're having trouble retaining people. This could be a way for getting in talent that's willing and to stay and has some loyalty to a company. Do you anticipate the retirement of highly skilled workers soon? Is another option for questions that you can ask employers. And then also diversity is a big challenge that a lot of companies face, or they really want to expand the diversity of their talent pool. They just don't know how to do that. So you want to listen out and see if they have any diversity goals that your program could help them meet. But again, it is a two-way street. So you want to help see, or you want to understand how well that organization will fit in with the needs of the youth that you work with. So one way to do that is to ask them, do you have staff available who could serve as mentors? It's not necessarily a requirement, but it is good to hear how companies really see and view investment into their staff, into their employees. Another question you can ask is, how common is it for the occupations that you have available and vacant? How common is that to be a young person's first job? Like, do you have other young people that work at your organization? Another question is, what kind of training is used to onboard new staff? Because you really want to hear, is this a company that's really kind of onboarding by fire and you just good luck? Or is this something that they really take intentional effort to make sure that all of their staff are successful when they start? And then lastly, how do you invest in your employees? Just kind of an overarching question that you can ask to see again how much time and attention that they pay and are able to pay to all of the staff, including the young adults that you work with. Next question or slide. We kind of touched on this before, but during the interview, you definitely want to live by the old adage of you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. You definitely want to do more listening than talking, because you want to hear some of the potential pain points that they're facing. Are they having challenges with recruitment, whether it's through diversifying their pipeline or attracting local talent? Maybe attracting young people. Do they have those persistent vacancies and high turnover? And do they have kind of high training costs that might be associated with all of the turnover that they do have? These are all things to kind of listen to, because when you start to pitch your services, that you want to be able to speak to these challenges and pain points. Next slide. So that brings us to the idea of pitching your services. Again, remember, we want to be as strengths based as possible. We want to share how our organizations are providing extra value, helping companies meet their goals, meet their bottom line by hiring and supporting really qualified young talent that you are preparing. So, how do you pitch your services? Next slide. It's really important, and I'm kind of beating a dead horse, but it's really important to keep in mind that your youth employment program is not charity. While there is a kind of community-based, mission, civic-minded aspect to this that can appeal to a number of employers, that definitely isn't necessarily the first priority for employers when they're thinking of partnering with you. You want to speak to how your youth employment program can address one or more business needs. And again, those business needs could be around recruitment, they could be around diversity, they could be around high training costs. But whatever it is, you want to say how your youth can help them overcome some of those challenges. So, what we have right now is a poll, just to kind of get a feel for what you feel like are some of the main reasons that companies want to partner with young adults. So, Kirsten, if you could bring up the poll for us. So, as you see, what is the top reason for businesses to engage in youth employment? Go ahead and answer that poll. We'll give you about 30 seconds to answer, and then we'll see what you say. About 5 more seconds. Okay. So, let's see. Let's share the results. So it looks like you all said that ability to tap into a future workforce is where you felt like was the number one reason for businesses to engage with youth employment. Now, while that is an important aspect of why businesses want to partner with organizations like yours, according to one study, that is actually not the top reason. So, Kirsten, if you can go to the next slide for me. So, the top reason for businesses to engage in youth employment, according to one study from Northeast Florida, United Way in that community conducted a study about business engagement for youth employers. The number one reason that they want to partner with organizations like yours is to increase the diversity in their organization. Um, a lot of businesses have good intentions and recognize the importance of diversity. They just don't know how to go about doing it. And for your organizations, many of whom partner with youth with barriers or who have been traditionally marginalized, or come from communities that have been traditionally marginalized, you offer a great service in terms of diversification of a talent pipeline. The second reason that they do partner is around the ability to tap into a future labor force. So you're right that that is one of the top reasons. They, for companies, especially those in industries that are facing that kind of silver tsunami, they want to be able to make sure that they are attracting young people to fill those positions, and then just make sure that they have a steady stream of new talent with kind of new exciting ideas. Another reason that they, at least in this study, identified as wanting to partner with youth employment programs is to overcome unfair hiring advantages. The study was a little unclear about what that meant, but I think what they were referring to was they don't want to just create an internship program, for example, that has, that's riddled with nepotism. They want to make sure that they are reaching out to communities who might otherwise be left out from the employment opportunities that they have. Cost-effective employees was number 4 on the reasons why that employers want to partner with youth employment programs. So young adults, who don't have a lot of job experience, will be a cheaper alternative. And this is speaking to the bottom line that many employers, of course, are concerned about. And then lastly, some employers have these kind of temporary work opportunities that would be perfect for, a short-term internship program or some other kind of career development experience. And they just don't necessarily have the staff to kind of take on some of these projects, especially kind of the administrative or clerical projects. So they would love to have a group of people to kind of fill those short-term work needs. But I think one of the most critical things about the study that popped up was that while the majority of respondents believed that participating in youth employment initiatives was beneficial to the community, this reason alone did not serve as a significant impetus for participation. So, in other words, kind of going back to that last slide, youth employment is not charity. While many organizations want to, be good civic partners and be community oriented, that's not necessarily the primary or even the top five, one of the top five motivators for why they would want to connect with your organization. So now what we're going to do though is have just another quick poll. And for this poll, we're going to investigate what are the top reasons for businesses to not engage in youth employment. Why do they not want to? So we'll spend about 30 seconds, give you some time to answer that poll question, and then we'll reveal the response in just a bit. And I'm realizing that I think I had apprenticeship on the brain. It's supposed to be disconnect between the opportunities and youth applicants. So my apologies. I spend a lot of time about apprenticeships. Okay, so in the poll here, share the results. So the top reason for businesses not to engage in youth employment, many of you, it's kind of a tie, felt like maybe lack of time was their primary concern. And then the other one was the disconnect between the opportunities, not apprenticeship, and youth applicants. So I'll stop sharing. And then Kirsten, if you can move to the next slide, we will see what that study from Northeast Florida revealed. So again, same study from the United Way mentioned that the disconnect between opportunities and youth applicants is really kind of the primary motivating reason, or excuse me, reason for them not to engage in youth employment. So essentially, a lot of employers have the bias that my job is just the jobs that I have available, even if they're entry level, just aren't necessarily a great fit for youth applicants. That may or may not be true, but when you're kind of interviewing employers and seeing if they're a great fit for your organization, you want to pay attention to why they feel like their entry level opportunities might not be a good fit for the young people. Because again, it could be something as simple as degree inflation, where they might just say, well, the people you serve, it doesn't sound like have BA degrees and all of our jobs require that. But it might be an opportunity to kind of push back gently and see why they actually think a BA degree is required for some of those entry level positions. Excuse me. Number two is finances. So finances was a big concern, but the great thing is that if you are selected as a Youth Career Pathways grantee, or even if not, you likely have some funding that could help offset some of the costs of hiring young people. Time was a big consideration. A lot of organizations just feel like they don't have the time to nurture the young people the way they might need. You can kind of address this concern when you're pitching your services by saying, we have staff that are willing and ready and available to kind of serve as external mentors to make sure that we're retaining the talent. Transportation was also actually, I thought it was actually a surprising barrier according to the employer's perspective. Many are concerned that they are too far out from kind of the hubs where young people might be located, for example, in the suburbs. For young people, if you have a program here in the city of Chicago, but a company is located in the suburbs, there might be some concern about the commute time and young people's ability to get to work. And then lastly, limitation of public resources. Companies are confused and or concerned they just don't have the availability to offset, again, some of those costs that could help them be successful employer partners. Next slide. So when hearing kind of the reasons why employers do want to engage with young or youth employment, or why they don't want to engage with it, you really can use those findings as kind of a way to prepare in advance answers to some of those concerns that frequently pop up. But you really, at the end of hearing all of these concerns, you really want to make sure that you're able to paraphrase what you've heard using business language. So using some of these kind of top workforce management challenges, use some of those buzzwords that employers often use to make sure that you are paraphrasing correctly what they're saying. And then you want to share your agency's value add. What can your service, what can your organization, and what can the young people that you prepare provide so that you can help these companies overcome some of the challenges that they might face? Next slide. So, one way to make sure that you are speaking the language of business, or making sure that you're paraphrasing correctly, is to avoid some of the jargon that we often use in the community based organization world, and translate it into the business world. So, I have on the left column some of the terms that we frequently use in nonprofit and CBO space. Things like job readiness training, JRT. Acronyms are even more challenging outside of nonprofit world. Nobody necessarily knows what JRT is. Asset based and client centered, we often use that frequently. 21st century and employability skills is a term that we often use. And it's not to say that these terms are less than what business uses. Every industry and every sector has its own way of speaking, and it's perfectly fine that we as community-based organizations use this term. But when we're talking outside of nonprofits, we want to make sure we're talking the language of business. So Kirsten, if you can click to reveal what some of the actual business speak is. Let's see if our animation worked. Oh, look. So business language. The way to kind of translate some of this is For example, job readiness training. Instead of saying job readiness training, you really want to just say, we have trained and ready to work young adults. It means the same thing, but it just kind of could potentially resonate more readily with employers. Instead of saying you're asset based or you're client centered, you just want to say that we're focused on connecting qualified candidates to job opportunities. 21st century skills, instead of saying kind of this overarching idea of 21st century skills, name the specific assets that your young adults have, whether it's customer service or team oriented or time management, that could help them survive and thrive in an employer environment. Job developer, again, that's a title we often use in nonprofits, but really it's just kind of a staffing specialist, is usually how businesses would refer to that person. A lot of companies don't necessarily know what wraparound services are. They could probably glean and kind of, guess what that might mean. But really, to help make it as clear as possible, you can say that we have people on staff who can help with retention and help our youth overcome employment barriers. You might even say we have something similar to an employee assistance program, where we make sure that people are getting their mental, physical, and health needs met before engaging in employment. One thing we often talk about is WIOA, CDBG, TANF. Um, Employers are not necessarily and very likely won't know what many, if not any of those mean. So you just can tell them that you have funding to offset costs. So when you're pitching your services, try to, again, switch your language into that business speak as opposed to our CBO jargon. Next slide, please. Another way to kind of boost your credibility when you're kind of both paraphrasing what employers said and you're pitching your services is to research terminology unique to that business. You don't have to pretend that you are, an industry insider, but peppering your language with a little bit of the same keywords that industry uses can make it seem and give you lend you that additional credibility that you will need to get the employers on board. You can find some of this terminology by going some of the resources that I have listed on the slide, like ONET, trade magazines, company websites, newspaper articles. Those are all great resources to find how that industry that you're targeting speaks. Next slide. Okay, so step 5 is to confirm the agreement. We've talked about how, first you're narrowing down your list of employer partners, you're asking for an interview, you're listening in the interview, and paraphrasing what you hear are the pain points that they're experiencing. You've pitched your services. You've done such a great job of doing that now you're at the point where you need to confirm what it is that this partnership will look like. Next slide. So how do you confirm the agreement? So first, it's great to send a summary of the meeting that you had or the interview that you had that outlines what it was that the business sounded like they needed, again, using some of that business language, and then reminding them of what your youth employment program can address and how your youth employment program can address those needs. And specifically, not only how can your young adults who are really well prepared meet the needs of the business, but what services your agency can offer to make sure that your young adults are successful. So remind them about things like retention services, remind them about some of the funding that you have that could help offset some of the costs, like transportation costs. There might be some equipment costs that youth have to incur, or even uniforms that you could help offset. Whatever it is, kind of summarize as best as you can what your agency can offer to make this sound as attractive as possible, as of an opportunity as possible. And then you also maybe want to summarize the benefits of working with youth in general. Youth, especially, Gen Z and millennials, to some extent, are kind of native technologists. They know how to use technology, through and through. They were born with it, being a part of their lives. And so that can be a great asset to many organizations who might feel like they're kind of getting left behind. Youth are also, of course, creative and innovative. They know how to use social media. All of these things can be reasons why employers might want to partner with young adults. And then also, if you have employer references and you've already developed kind of a catalog and Rolodex of people who can speak to how your agency has helped them, make sure you include that too in your summary. Next slide. So after you kind of confirm the relationship, or excuse me, confirm the agreement, and you've sent off, and maybe you've established kind of clear delineation of responsibilities for each party. Now it's all about maintaining their relationship. Next slide. So to maintain the relationship, first thing you want to do is make sure you're sending great candidates. You all do great work to prepare your young adults for the workforce. And so you want to make sure that they are, in fact, really well prepared, that they know what to expect on day one of the job. And so part of the way that you can prepare them is having that business involvement from the onset of developing your program so that you can tailor your kind of job readiness training as specifically as possible to the context of your employer partners. Another thing about maintaining relationships is to use business language to address any challenges. So instead of saying, "Oh, we'll have a case manager talk to the youth about whatever program or problem came up," talk again about retention efforts with your young adults and how we, really are invested in making sure that we retain all of the young adult candidates that we've sent over. So we'll address that with our staffing specialist. You also can offer ongoing technical assistance. So your agency, for example, might be really great at mentor training. So you could offer to come into an employer and teach a mentorship class to the employees there so that they feel prepared to take on the responsibility of kind of nurturing and guiding a young person in one of their first career development experiences. Another thing you can do is just create a schedule for check-ins to make the relationship really intentional. You want to make sure you're setting aside specific times to check in with the employer. In the beginning of the relationship, of course, make it as frequent as needed, and then that can kind of trail off as you all become more established. But make sure you are always in communication, even with long-term partners. Should go without saying, but it's also good to just serve as a reminder. And then lastly, it would be helpful to get memorandums of understanding, MOUs together so that you can always avoid potential miscommunication by having a really specific MOU that outlines all of the responsibilities of every party that's involved in this employer partnership. Next slide. So that's essentially those kind of 6 steps that we just covered are the heart of employer engagement for youth employment. If you have any other tips or ideas that have come up, please feel free to share that in the chat. I've also listed some resources and references that I kind of leaned on heavily throughout the presentation. And I think they would be a great resource for you as well. Feel free to refer to this once this PowerPoint actually has already been posted on the WorkNet site, and the presentation recording will be posted in a couple of days. So you can refer to this slide then. Next slide. Also, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is here, and we, as I mentioned, work closely with apprenticeship programs and kind of apprenticeship policy in the state, but we'd be happy to share any insight we have into either employer outreach or youth engagement as well. And I'm always happy to hear from folks. But that's essentially all that I have to share today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Morgan. I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A, but we'll give everyone a second to kind of post those if they would like. I did put the website in the chat to everyone, and that is the NOFA webpage for all of these technical assistant sessions. That has information about our upcoming technical assistant sessions. I know we have one again tomorrow, as well as all of the recordings and PowerPoint slides from the previous TA sessions. And it's also where you can find the slides for today, as well as the recording from today within 48 hours. So that website is kind of supposed to be a one-stop shop for everything for these technical assistant sessions. So please feel free to copy and paste that and make note of it. Okay, so while I was rambling, we did have a question come through. Gina would like to know, can job shadows also be part opportunities in the grant?
I don't recall seeing job shadows listed as one of the program models, but I don't want to speak out of turn. So I would just refer to, I believe, Tara Scott would be the best person at the Department of Commerce. And her contact information is on the Illinois WorkNet site.
Yes, I can put her email in the chat as well. And she is more than willing. Typically, she is on these sessions, but she wasn't able to attend today. but she's more than willing to answer any questions you might have as well. Kathy Swinson. Yep, okay, you saw that. Let me make sure I'm getting Tara's email right. Okay. So
Perfect.
just put that email in the chat for any of you who might need to contact Tara. And I don't see any other questions or anything. Again, this was recorded, so feel free to send it out to anyone who might need it on your teams, or come back to it at a later date if you need to rewatch or re-listen to what Morgan has said. And with that, we don't have anything else coming through, Morgan. So thank you so much for your time this morning, and thank you to all of our attendees for their time as well. And we will see you tomorrow if you attend tomorrow's TA session.
Great. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.